Attention startup leaders. Are you strapped for time but hungry for strategic insights? Introducing Managed Chaos, your go-to podcast for navigating the startup world in less time than your morning commute. Join us as we share expert advice, real-world examples, and actionable strategies to help you scale your business, allocate resources effectively, and achieve visionary results. Tune into Managed Chaos and join a community of like-minded innovators on the path to entrepreneurial success.
The early days of starting your company can feel overwhelming, with decisions to be made at every turn. What if you could avoid some of the most costly mistakes and go in eyes wide open? Welcome to Managed Chaos Podcast, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. I'm Rachel Anderson.
And I'm Katrina Purcell.
And today we are talking common mistakes when launching your business. So really, I think there's only one place to start here today, and that's with the question, what is, in fact, the most important thing to do first?
I think it's a great question, and one that both you and I know well because we both started our own businesses recently, and I definitely made this mistake where I didn't think about the long term of what I was trying to do. I thought about the very in the moment thing and made decisions based off of where I was at that very point in time, not where I might be 6 months from then. And I think having good advisors helps you to understand that, see that, and maybe be a little bit more realistic about what you need to accomplish. But it's very important to start to think long term, even in the early days. Yes, a lot of startups fail. Yes, there will be challenges and pivots and things you need to do. But you have to know what your end goal is to make sure that you're making all the right decisions at the very beginning.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because I think for me, if I was like doing this all over again, didn't know the things, being a little bit more specific would help me to understand how to contextualize for myself. So when I think about, end goal in mind, a lot of startups and people that go after series funding end up with three sort of common paths. Either they want to go public, and so their funding gets bought out by the public, obviously, in the stock market. They want to be acquired or merge with another company because that allows them to recoup that money for their investors, or that sometimes is the goal, right? You want to incorporate with another company because you want to get paid for your ideas, for your job well done, and then you want to go start something new or do something different. Mm-hmm. Or frankly, you don't succeed. I mean, those are usually the three options there. So when you say start with the goal in mind, are you thinking that far down the road? Like a business owner should know what the outcome of their business or what they want for their business? Or are you talking about you should start with the end in mind of what does it look like 1 year from now? What does it look like for right now I launched one product, but I really want three. Can you give some more definition to what that looks like?
Yes. So I think it is more of the 1 year from now, not the 5 year from now, because as you start to think about 1 year from now, that will help you pick the right investors. So as a business owner, if you would like to IPO, picking an investor who's never done that before and wouldn't be, viable on that path is not a good investor for you. And you're able to say, I'm sorry, this isn't good investment. I need to find someone who's more aligned with my goal that eventually I do want to IPO. In the early stages, you might just take money from whoever wants to give you money. But it's really important to think about, what value are they adding? Are they someone who can be an advisor? Do they have a good network? Are they a potential customer and they can provide feedback that way? When you start to just take money from anyone who's giving you money without a strong understanding of what their thesis is, do they actually believe in your product? Do they believe in your market? Do they understand that your goal is to IPO and not be acquired, right? That, an acquisition is sometimes a much easier process and can be quicker for the investor to get their return. So really understanding and aligning on your very long term, but then also that 1 year out. So who's your customer? How are you servicing that customer? What problem are you solving for them is really key.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you went more into detail there, because I think you hit on some really important things, including knowing just far enough out what your goal is, but also aligning so importantly with the expertise of the investor. And, as someone who loves to invest in people that are young, and that could be young company, young product, young whatever, right? Like just in general, I also want to advocate that sometimes an investor who doesn't have experience in something, but that wants that experience and wants to invest in you in order to get that experience could also align with goals. That could also be a really valuable partnership that you both get to learn. But if you don't know exactly where your strengths lie, where your own company goals are, to your exact point, that becomes just a really difficult place to be should you find yourself in the middle of all of it, having not considered that, and then realizing that that's not a good choice. It's really good. So what is the common, or maybe a common, early mistake that founders often find themselves making?
So I think one of them, in my opinion, is definitely not doing enough customer research for product market fit. So you've had an idea and you think you know what the market wants, or you think you know how to solve it, but there's a lot of research up front that you need to go into before you start developing a product. And I think oftentimes if founders are so excited about their idea and they really think it's going to be groundbreaking and revolutionary, and they just kind of steamroll ahead. And there's that level of research that really needs to be done to understand the market, to understand your customers, which will help when creating your marketing materials. It will allow you to really speak to the customer and really understand how their pain point can be solved by your product. And I think in general, when we don't do that research up front, we get that information too late in the process. And that's how we end up having multiple products before we're ready, or we have multiple iterations of our product which aren't scalable because we weren't able to think up front and get that feedback before we built something that already existed now.
Yeah, that's so good. Man, you're making me think about this conversation that I just was listening to about this startup concept that you're talking about. So there is a misnomer almost that if you have virality, you have successful product. And that's not necessarily true. Like something can go viral or become popular very quickly, or maybe you grow really fast because all of a sudden a bunch of people are into your product, but that doesn't mean that you have found your ideal customer and that you're solving the right problem for the right customer. And so we've seen that in pharmaceuticals, where a drug will come onto the market and it realizes that it's actually better at solving a totally different product than what it was created for. But we also see that in technology, and it's really interesting. I actually, the viewers can definitely fact check me on this, but I kind of think Twitch was this originally too, that it was created for something totally different. But when they realized the power of bringing communities together and having this ability to live stream for conversations, for video gaming, all these different things, it kind of shifted their market. So really that viral ability, but then also proving it in market and having your due diligence with your customer and the problems you solve, man, I think that that's just so important.
Well, in reality, that's what ends up getting you funding, right? And so I think, being able to have a strong story and a good idea is good, but being able to actually have a product where you can show the research, you can show the customers, you can show the impact is much more valuable once you get to that stage where you're looking to get funding.
Yeah, that's great. So then if you're really trying to do all these things, and there is so much for young companies to do, it feels like you just are never able to do enough. So how do you keep yourself from doing too much?
Prioritization is definitely one of the big things. I think, being able to understand how much money you actually have, what your runway looks like, how you're impacting that runway. So a lot of startups are not yet cash flow positive or even cash flow neutral. So understanding that you're going to need some continued investment in those early days until you're making enough sales that you're able to actually sustain your business. Making sure that when you're making those first hires, that they understand the stage that you're at, what your long-term goal is, and that they're very aligned, but that you're not bringing on too many people too quickly, right? So proving out the idea, requires a certain level of team. Maybe it's contractors, maybe it's part-time folks, things that make it flexible so that you're able to adjust your payroll, because that's one of the biggest expenses that companies have aside from their technology. And so really understanding, and this goes back to the comment you said earlier, what you want to be 1 year from then, right? And so not rushing to make your company larger than it is before it's ready. Because I think a lot of times you might get very excited. I own my own company. Let me make my first hires. And then you realize in 6 months, as your product has adjusted in market, as your product market fit has been found, then maybe you didn't hire the right people and you got to go back to the drawing board. And so really, understanding what your value proposition is, who your ideal customers are, and how you're servicing them are so important in the early stages. And so taking that time to think and be strategic and really think about those things and document them so that you have them in the future when you make decisions.
They say time is the only finite resource. And I love that this entire thing is contingent on remembering that you can't rush this part of the process if you ultimately want to value and save time, effort, scrapping and starting over, the whole process. So I love that. Take your time, make sure you have the right things in place, that you understand the customer, you understand your roadmap, and then move forward based on those 1-year goals. That was great. So this has been such a good conversation. I feel like this could have just been the pitch for our entire podcast every single year. There's so much here that I'm like, oh, we can do this and we can do this. It's coming soon. So Katrina, as always, it was great chatting. And this has been Managed Chaos.
This was another informative episode of Managed Chaos, the podcast for startups. You can find us on all of your favorite podcasting apps, as well as on Instagram and YouTube, where we are at Managed Chaos Podcast. For additional resources or to continue the conversation, you can find Katrina Purcell and Rachel Anderson on LinkedIn.